The Gay Divorcee is the 6th episode of the 2nd season of Good Advice. This is directed by Bessell, and as always there will be spoilers as I talk about what happens, and I really thoroughly enjoyed this one. I don't actually have too many notes, but that doesn't reflect my enjoyment. To be fair, there's not a lot of variety in what happens, but it's still very well done, and it actually starts off with, as is usually the case, Susan with some patients, and she's talking with a man called Dave, who's played by Hagerty, which I rather enjoyed. His interaction was he was very honest, and very much like Susan's breasts. It was an interesting way to start things. The main narrative, in fact, the only narrative, involves Susan going to the PTA meeting, but she doesn't want to go alone. So she takes Henriette, who is her housekeeper, but Henriette doesn't want them to know that she's a housekeeper because she feels that if she tells people that's what she does, she'll be roped into doing work alongside the janitor at the end of the night, and we actually get an indication that probably would have been the case. So Susan introduces her as a special family friend, which I have to say was definitely a strange way to word it. And a woman called Jeanette, pronouncing it as Jeanette, played by Wendie Malick, latched onto this and assumed that they were in a romantic relationship together, and Susan's bothered by this. And she's not bothered that somebody would think she's a lesbian. It took a little bit of time for her to establish really why she was bothered about this. But she realizes the real reason she was bothered is that somebody had made an assumption about her just because she's not in a relationship with a man. And I thought this was really interesting. And by this point, we're basically at the end of the episode. In terms of the specifics, there isn't really a lot, but it was very well written. And I loved the interaction between Henriette and Susan, and I just really thoroughly enjoyed it, but there isn't a lot of variety. But then Susan realizes that she was bothered because somebody had assumed something about her. I'll be honest, I don't completely agree with that. Yes, it was an assumption, but I think calling her a special family friend, just the way she said it, seemed like there was something being implied. What that something is obviously the assumption, but it definitely felt like somebody would question that. What does that even mean? So Jeanette probably shouldn't have come to that conclusion without asking, although I don't know why she'd come out and ask about it. That would be a bit inappropriate. But the point there is that I don't think Susan can say that she fully just assumed, just because Susan wasn't with a man, that she was now in a lesbian relationship. But I think the point still stands, is that if you're not in a relationship with the opposite sex, people are potentially going to assume things, and then the others start saying similar things. Jack says people assume that he's gay because he's not in a committed relationship, and Artie points out that people assume that he and his wife have really boring conversations because they've been married forever, and Paige says people assume that she'd be bad to give credit to. In most of those situations, certainly with Paige and Artie, the assumptions might be true. But certainly with Susan and Jack, that's not the case. And I think it does a really good job of highlighting the fact that just because somebody might not at that point be in a committed relationship with somebody, it doesn't mean that there's an underlying or a secret or a mysterious reason for it. And people obviously did assume, and I guess Jeanette didn't speculate so much as just assumed that she was correct, that Henriette was a special family friend because she was a romantic lover of Susan's. Had Susan been in a committed relationship with somebody of the opposite sex, obviously she wouldn't have jumped to that conclusion. So I think it raises some really interesting points, and I feel like Susan definitely could have worded it better than just saying special family friend. She could have just said, this is my friend. But nevertheless, that's the way it went. And it was an interesting episode. As I said, I didn't make too many notes. I didn't write much down, but it didn't mean that I didn't enjoy it. I did. I really thoroughly enjoyed it. Definitely an interesting episode. And although it's probably not my all-time favourite, I thought The Gay Divorcee was still pretty good.